It's 11 p.m. Every other child on this street is asleep. But this one is not even close. She's not scared. She's not upset. She's not even trying to resist. Her brain simply will not turn off. And tonight we're going inside that brain to find out exactly what is happening. Because the answer is far stranger than anyone told you. We've always thought of sleep as simple. Tired child. Dark room. Eyes close. Done. But for millions of children between the ages of 3 and 5 who have ADHD, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, bedtime is not the end of the day. It is the beginning of a battle. A battle they are not choosing. A battle their biology is forcing on them. And here's what makes this extraordinary. The reason these children cannot fall asleep is not a behavioral problem. It is not bad parenting. It is not too much sugar. It is something happening deep inside their brains in a system so fundamental, so ancient, that scientists are only now beginning to understand it. It involves their internal clock, their brain chemistry, and the very architecture of how their neurons are growing. This is not a bedtime problem. This is a neurological event. Most people, doctors included, until recently believed something straightforward. ADHD children struggle to sleep because they are hyperactive. They're wound up. Too much energy, too much screen time, too much stimulation. Give them a routine, a warm bath, dim the lights, read them a book, and they'll eventually drift off. This sounds logical. It feels logical, and it is completely, scientifically incomplete. Because here's what researchers discovered when they actually put ADHD children in sleep laboratories and measured their brains in real time. The problem is not behavior. The problem is biology. A landmark population study, tracking children from birth to 11 years old, published in a major medical journal, found something chilling. ADHD children showed disturbed sleep patterns at every single age measured. Not just when they were old enough to act out, from as early as 3 years old, before anyone had told them they had ADHD, before any diagnosis existed. The sleep problem came first. And the question that should have been asked all along was this: why? To answer that, scientists needed to look not at behavior, but at the brain itself. And what they found surprised everyone. Researchers at the National Institute of Mental Health in the United States conducted one of the largest brain imaging studies ever performed on children. They scanned over 400 children, half with ADHD, half without, measuring the thickness of the outer brain layer, the cortex, as it developed over time. What they discovered changed the way medicine thinks about ADHD entirely. In typical children, the brain's cortex reaches its peak thickness at around 7.5 years old. In children with ADHD, 10.5 years old, 3 full years behind schedule. And the delay was not random. It was concentrated in one specific place, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for attention, impulse control, decision-making, and critically regulating the sleep-wake cycle. In other words, the part of the brain that tells the rest of the brain when to wind down was years behind in its development. This was not a behavioral delay. This was a biological one. Published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2007, this research reshaped how we understand ADHD at its most fundamental level. The brain is not broken. It is simply running on a different timeline. Now, here is where it gets extraordinary. Because the brain delay explains the behavior, but it does not fully explain the sleep. For that, we need to go deeper. Inside every human brain, including yours, right now there is a tiny cluster of neurons called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It is smaller than a grain of rice. And it controls time. This structure acts as your body's master clock. It tells your organs when to work, when to rest, when to release hormones, and most importantly, when to sleep. And this internal clock is powered, in large part by a chemical called dopamine. Here is the secret nobody told you. Children with ADHD have measurably lower levels of dopamine. Not sometimes. Consistently, structurally, as a feature of how their brains are built. And dopamine is not just the chemical of reward and motivation. Dopamine is a times daytime signal asterisk. It tells your brain's clock, it is day. Stay awake, stay alert. Without enough dopamine at the right time, the clock drifts. Researchers have shown that the brains of children with ADHD produce melatonin, the hormone that triggers sleep, roughly 45 minutes later than typical children. 45 minutes. That does not sound like much. But for a 3-year-old whose bedtime is 7:30 p.m., that means their brain is not biologically ready to sleep until 8:15 at the earliest. And on some nights, even later. The child lying awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, she is not refusing to sleep. Her brain has not yet received the chemical signal that sleep is supposed to begin. She is waiting for a clock that runs late. But here is where it gets even stranger. Because the delayed clock is only part of the story. The other part involves what happens during the sleep these children do eventually get, and what their brains are silently failing to do while they sleep. Something that has consequences that stretch far beyond the next morning. In a series of studies conducted across European research institutions, scientists wanted to understand what happens inside the sleeping brain of a child with ADHD. Not just whether they slept, but the quality of what was happening at the neurological level. They used polysomnography machines that measure brain waves, eye movements, oxygen levels, and muscle activity simultaneously, all night long. What they saw on those monitors was remarkable. In healthy children, once deep sleep begins, the brain produces something called slow wave activity. These are long, rolling brain waves, almost like ocean swells that sweep across the cortex. And during these slow waves, something beautiful happens. The brain replays the day. Every word learned, every face memorized, every emotion felt. It transfers all of it from short-term storage in a structure called the hippocampus into long-term memory deeper in the cortex. This process is called memory consolidation. And in healthy 3 to 5-year-olds, it is incredibly powerful. Children at this age learn faster than at any other point in their lives. Their brains consolidate memories at rates that adults cannot match. Sleep is not a pause in their development. Sleep times is times their development. But in children with ADHD? The EEG monitors told a different story. The slow waves were there, but they were distributed differently. They were weaker in the prefrontal regions, the very areas that needed them most. Researchers at institutions across Germany and Scandinavia found that children with ADHD showed significantly reduced sleep-dependent consolidation of declarative memory, the kind of memory used for language, facts, and emotional experiences. The events of the day were not being filed away properly. They were fading, and the next morning, those children woke up not just tired but subtly, invisibly, less equipped than they should have been. If you are a parent watching this, you are not just observing this. You are living it. Every night you have spent outside that door, wondering why they cannot simply fall asleep. This is the answer. It was never about willpower. It was never about routine failures. The child in that bed is not being difficult. Their brain is doing something profoundly complex, on a slightly different schedule, in a slightly different way, and the world has not always been built to accommodate that difference. And if you are an adult who had ADHD as a child and could never sleep, you just understood something about your own childhood that nobody ever explained to you. There is one more piece of this that scientists have only recently uncovered. Buried deep in the brain, roughly at its center, is a tiny endocrine gland called the pineal gland. This gland produces melatonin, the sleep hormone. Researchers measuring brain structure in children with ADHD found something striking. Their pineal glands were measurably smaller than in neurotypical children. A smaller pineal gland produces less melatonin. Less melatonin means a weaker sleep signal. A weaker sleep signal means longer delays before sleep begins. This is not a temporary condition that disappears with age. Research published in Frontiers in Psychiatry found that approximately 3/4 of individuals who had ADHD in childhood showed evidence of delayed circadian rhythms into adulthood. The clock that runs late in a 4-year-old often still runs late in a 40-year-old. This is not a childhood quirk. It is a lifelong biological signature. Here is why this matters beyond bedtime battles. Research tracking children from age 2 onward found that persistent sleep disturbances were associated with smaller gray matter volume in the brain. In particular, children with chronic sleep problems showed a thinner dorsolateral prefrontal cortex by age 7, the same region already delayed in ADHD. Sleep deprivation does not just exhaust the body. In a developing brain aged 3 to 5, a brain that is still building its architecture, poor sleep actively interferes with the construction process. The neurons that should be connecting don't. The slow waves that should be consolidating memories can't. The prefrontal cortex that is already running years behind schedule falls even further behind. This is not about being tired the next morning. This is about what the brain builds or fails to build during the most critical developmental window in a child's life. That is the urgency no one talks about. And the reason that addressing ADHD sleep problems in children aged 3 to 5 is not optional. It is essential. That child lying awake at 11 p.m. is not broken. Her brain is not wrong. It is wired with a clock that runs on a different rhythm, built from neurons that are developing on a longer timeline, powered by a chemistry that processes the world with unusual intensity. In another time, before the rigid schedules of modern life, that rhythm might not have been called a disorder at all. But we live in this time, and so she and every child like her needs something specific. Not more discipline, not earlier bedtimes imposed without understanding. She needs a world that knows what her brain is actually doing at night. She needs light in the morning to reset her clock. She needs darkness and quiet earlier in the evening. She needs caregivers who understand that when she says, "I can't sleep," she is telling the truth in the most profound way possible. Her brain is not refusing. Her brain is waiting. And if we understand what it is waiting for, we can finally, gently, help it arrive. Now, here is a question I want to leave you with. If the ADHD brain runs on a delayed internal clock, what happens to that clock when these children grow up? Does it catch up? Does it stay shifted forever? And what does that mean for the adults walking around every day, wondering why they have never been able to sleep like everyone else? That answer in the next video. If you know a child who struggles with sleep, or a parent who has struggled with this, share this video with them. Because sometimes, understanding is the beginning of everything.